Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So tell us about Majjhima number 82, the Ratthapala Sutta.
So the Ratthapala Sutta begins with the Blessed One wandering through the Kuru country, and he comes to a village named Tulakotita, where a eminent Brahmin family has a son named Ratthapala, who hears a discourse by the Buddha and is so inspired he thinks it is not easy to live the holy life while at home, to live the holy life pure as a polished conch shell. Why don't I shave off my hair and beard, don a yellow robe, and go forth? He asks permission of the Buddha, but the Buddha says, the Blessed One, the Tathagata, does not grant permission for going forth without one's parents' permissions. Do you have your parents' permission? Which is a beautiful acknowledgement in the Vinaya of this bond between child and parent, that we aren't actually supposed to go forth without permission from our parent, which is quite radical. And we know, we've seen the effect, even if parents aren't initially terribly enthusiastic about their child leaving for the monastic life, it's very common for over time, it really to affect their heart and for them to become quite inspired by it. So, and I know monastics who have waited a long time before being able to go forth to sort of fulfill this. And just, I really want to pause there and just acknowledge in a world filled with orders of renunciance where one actually cuts off one's family, the Buddha is saying, no, you take your parents along on this one, at least as much as you can. So Ratthapala goes. His parents are not terribly thrilled about this idea. They say, we would be unwilling to lose you even if you were, sick and ill and about to die. How could we possibly let you go if you're healthy? But Ratthapala, he sees the power of this path, and he lies down on the ground and determines not to take food until they give him permission. They try to convince him. It doesn't work. They get his friends to try to convince him. It doesn't work. And in the end, the friends say, look, just let him go. If it's not leading to his happiness, he'll come back. And so they give him permission, but say, come and visit us. And I actually lived with an Ajahn who did this exact thing. His parents were not excited about him ordaining, and he refused to eat until he was given permission. It seems extreme, but in the end, the goodness that came from this monastic's heart, and I think what it did for his parents in the long run was undeniable. So Ratthapala goes forth and in no long time attains awakening. Although the commentaries note that it's no long time in this case means 12 years. And it's good to note that when in the suttas we can be like, gosh, all these people are attaining awakening in no long time and I'm not anywhere close, or I'm not there yet. But to know it's kind of a stock phrase that actually can mean quite a long time and somewhat humanizing. And that may be accurate because when Ratthapala returns, after the Buddha gives him permission, after examining his mind to see that he can't fall from the holy life, to go fulfill his promise to visit his parents, they don't recognize him. His dad sees him coming in the distance. His father sees him coming in the distance and just says, oh, these recluses took my son, and he receives nothing but scorn at their doorstep. And they don't recognize him, which indicates that quite a long time had passed. But their servant in the back of the house throwing out old gruel, he says, put it in my bowl if you're about to throw it out. And she recognizes his hands and his feet, which is interesting. It's almost a mirror image of in the Odyssey, how Odysseus's kind of servant recognizes him by his hands and his feet. And his father learns about this and is overcome and invites him. And they try to bring him back. They try to lure him back with a pile of bullion, gold coins, saying, this is your inheritance, with his former wives. But he resists. He says, it is better that you throw this gold in the river. And with his former wives, he calls them sister. And they faint, saying, he calls us sister. But the Buddha says we should look on, women as our sisters, as our mothers. It's beautiful. And he then utters this profound asubha verse, basically a body contemplation. He says, look at this doll pranked out. It may attract or fool one who has not attained the further shore, but not me. Then he goes and leaves and abides in the local king's pleasure grove. The king learns about him and has apparently was quite impressed by this young man of a prominent family who went forth despite everything, and goes to visit him and asks, why did you go forth? You weren't ill. Nothing was wrong. And then Ratthapala gives this amazing summary of the Dharmic teachings in a very unique way that can almost be overshadowed by his act of going forth at the beginning of the sutta, but shouldn't be. A 4-part Dharma summary, which we'll get into, but that is extremely moving. There's so much to go into in the sutta, far more than 11 minutes can possibly do justice to. But Ajahn, let me pass it back to you. What would you draw out of this discourse?
Okay, so this is a very well-known discourse, which has inspired, I think, generation after generation of young people who want to go forth. And Ratthapala himself is given the designation by the Buddha as foremost among those who go forth out of faith. And a number of things regarding the way he goes forth. The phrase that he uses is that the home life is cramped and dusty. It is not easy for one living the home life to live the holy life, utterly perfect and pure, like a polished conch shell. Suppose I were to shave off my hair and beard and go don the ochre robe and go forth from home life into homelessness. That's the same phrase which monastics all over the world go forth with. They say that when they're becoming an anagarika, taking on that level of ordination. And the model of someone basically going on a hunger strike, we find this to get permission from their parents. We find this in a number of different instances of Sumedha Teri, in the Therigatha, verse 16.1. It's a great story, very inspiring woman who goes forth and goes on a hunger strike like Ratthapala in a successful way. Her husband, her was going to be husband, is like rushing the door, and she goes on this hunger strike and just great success, ended up going forth and becoming an arahant. One story where it takes a bad turn is in the origin story to the first parajika, or defeat rule. So basically verbatim, the same story as here with Ratthapala, where Sudina is the name of the monk. He goes on a hunger strike, very inspired. His parents give permission, then he goes forth, and then there's a famine in the land and he's not getting much food, so goes back to his family's where they're dwelling. He had, in no long time, kind of gets hungry, goes back to where his parents were living, and they, like Ratthapala's parents, basically get his former wife to dress up and try to lure him back to the home life. And he initially says no, just like Ratthapala does, and gives a very similar response to Ratthapala here, which I think is hilarious in both instances, where Ratthapala in the sutta and Sudina actually say, I can tell you, if you wouldn't get offended, what you can do with all of your gold. And then the father figure saying, please tell me. And then they say, well, you can take a hempen sack and put all of your gold in there. And you can imagine the father being like, yeah, okay, then what? And then you can take it down, put it in a cart, and then throw it in the river, because that would save you all the trouble and danger that would occur from trying to protect it. But at any rate, in this negative version with Sudina, eventually the family says, okay, just have sex with your former life once, because we don't have any progeny. And Sudina, in this bad origin story for the monk's rule about sex, has sex, and that's why the Buddha gives that training rule. But back to Ratthapala, he's not lured back into home life and goes forth. As you point out, this relationship between children and their parents, the origin story, why the Buddha makes it necessary that one gets their parents' permission, is King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father. After the Buddha gives ordination to Rahula, the Buddha's son, King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father, says, the bond one has, one's affection for children, runs deep. It cuts through the outer skin and the inner skin, and it cuts through the flesh, and it cuts through the sinews, and it cuts down through the bone and cuts down to the bone marrow. It would be good if when you went forth, it was hard. When Nanda, his other son from a different marriage, went forth, that was hard. And then when Rahula went forth, it was even harder. So please, in the future, make one get one's parents' permission. So just jumping to the end of the Ratthapala Sutta, in the Dhammayut Order of America, in their chanting book, I think translated by Tanisaro Bhikkhu, it takes these 4 Dhamma Summaries. And for me, it was a big part of when I started reciting these every day, a big repeated, before I ordained, it made me reflect on the insufficiency of the world. And the verses are, Upaniyati loco, the world is swept away. Aduvo, it does not endure. Atano loco, the world offers no shelter. Anabisaro, there is no one in charge. Asoko loco, the world has nothing of its own. Sabang pahaya gamaniyang, one has to pass on, leaving everything behind. Uno loco, the world is insufficient. Atito, insatiable. Tanha daso, a slave to craving. Like if you reflect on the truth of any one of those four or their subparts, it really does take away a lot of the flavor of the things which draw one's attention, but which really aren't that substantial or that don't provide that much lasting happiness. So we just encourage people who've seen or gotten some sense of that flavor to maybe memorize those verses and reflect and see that it can shift the heart, not to a depressive mode, but to one of remembering that which is highest and that which one is really worthy of being inspired by. So Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is pabaja, which means to go forth, to renounce, to ordain.
Highest in that which one mode, but to one of remembering that which is highest and that which one is really worthy of being inspired by. So Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is pabaja, which means to go forth, to renounce, to ordain. And it comes from the root vaj, which means to go, and pa, which means out. So out of the household into the renunciant life.
All right. Well, let's all go forth from our bad habits into good habits, starting with seeing you over on Zoom in just a moment, and then next week for Majjhima 83.
The Zoom thing's a good habit.
Yeah, agree. Agree. Ajahn.
Ajahn.